I know it's a busy week in Albuquerque, so we really are very excited to see this group here with us today. My name is Michelle Lantieri. I'm the head curator here at the IPCC Museum, and it's been my pleasure and honor to work with these guest curators here that have offered us and provided us this really amazing exhibition. And so the exhibition down the hall that you're going to be able to see is called Restoring Our Heart Places Contemporary Pueblo Architecture. And it's guest curated by Dr. Ted Hajola from Ana Pueblo and by Dr. Lynn Paxson. And they are the two people here all the way to our left. Let's go ahead and give them a round of applause for all they did. And so we just want to introduce the program to you briefly, and then I'll hand it off to our curators and speakers. So this program series, Meet the Architects and Designers, Pueblo Architecture Today, this is in association with the exhibition here in South Gallery that you all will see after the program. And this really gives you a good chance for some insights into what's happening in the field of architecture and design, and especially in our region, and especially through an Indigenous lens. So we're really excited to hear what everyone has to say today. And there are several more programs after this one. So this series will run through early August. So just keep an eye out on our social media and our e-blasts. And also this program series is sponsored by the New Mexico Humanities Council. And so we want to give them a big thanks and also a round of applause. Thank you. Okay, and so our format for today is that we're going to have two presentations, one by Anjelica Gallegos and one by Cynthia Figueroa-McInteer. And then we will go into a roundtable discussion between these four people, the curators and the speakers. And then after that, we'll have the tour of the exhibition. And so one other just request is if you didn't sign in on the way into the room, if you could make sure to sign in on our sign-in sheet. There's a kind of a high top table back there. If you all can stop by and jot your name down, we really appreciate that for our reporting for our grant for this program series. So just a couple more things just to introduce our guest curators. So Dr. Ted Hajola is a distinguished professor and Regents Professor in the Community and Regional Planning Program, School of Architecture and Planning, University of New Mexico. He holds a PhD in political science from the University of Hawaii at Manoa. He has a master's in city planning from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology and a BFA in architecture from UNM. He founded UNM Indigenous Design and Planning Institute and co-founded the Indigenous Planning Division of the American Planning Association. And Dr. Lynn Paxson is an emerita professor of architecture at Iowa State University. She holds degrees in both design and social science and is interested in architecture and design as cultural phenomena. A member of the American Indian Council of Architects and Engineers, Dr. Paxson has been recognized by the American Collegiate Schools of Architecture for her work in diversifying the architecture curriculum through Native cultures and issues. And thank you so much for being here today. I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Dr. Lynn Paxson.
First Dr. Ted, then Dr.
And Dr. Lynn Paxson. Welcome everybody, and thanks for joining us. This has been quite an adventure in terms of thinking about how to represent our designers, practitioners, and professionals in the field of architecture, specifically those who are indigenous to this region, and highlighting Pueblo people in particular. And really, the germination of this had occurred decades ago. We've been working on this a long time, and it really is as a result of trying to think about how it is that we have progressed in the face of a profession that really has not acknowledged the presence of indigenous architects, much less Pueblo architects. And when Lynn and I began to sort of take this journey in order to sort of equalize that representation, we got into this real ambitious spin about how it is that we could talk about it from the standpoint of all the kind of innovation that has occurred around Indigenous architecture in the country. Quickly, we're overwhelmed. It didn't take us but like a luncheon to find out that that was way too big. So then we sort of pulled back and said, well, maybe we can do it on a regional basis. We tried that for a while. That was way too big. And then we went, let's do it by state. And that was way too big. And then finally we said, let's do something that we really know something about. So the whole intent of looking at it from a real tribal specific point of view is really, in a sense, to plant that notion of low-hanging fruit from the standpoint of then using this as a way to model how other tribes, potentially within the country and actually hemispherically, can think about how to represent the evolution and the innovation and the progress that has been made by little particular groups. So the only other thing that you need to sort of think about is that when you go into the way that we represented it, we have dismissed this idea of presenting it just all these kind of glossy pictures of buildings and usually kind of contouring to the ego of the particular architect. That usually seems to be the modus operandi for many of these kinds of exhibits, but instead framed it from the standpoint of responses to many of the kind of major policies that have occurred after the 19 Indian Self-Determination Act. And we didn't know until the very last hour that this is the 50th year anniversary of the Indian Self-Determination Act. So we can just see from those decades that have evolved since then just how much impact that has been had within our own communities. And I'm specifically speaking about Pueblo, but I think every tribe itself has an equal amount of representation from that standpoint. So in the course of thinking about how it is that we would like to bring up voices that have really influenced and impacted on this, then we developed a series as well too as part of the exhibit planning. And I'm really going to be thankful that in that context then we've been able to engender a lot of people who have contributed, and we're actually still in the process of continuing to add content into this. So hopefully you will come back and see more things that are added in terms of that conversation that's going forth. So with that said, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague Lynn, the real Lynn. And she's the one that's really going to take charge of moderating this panel. I'm going to step back and just kind of listen like the rest of you as well too. But thank you very much for supporting this particular endeavor and spread the word. I think that those of you who have had a chance to see the exhibit know just the extent and depth, and this is not an exhibit you can absorb completely within an hour's period of time. So come back over and over again. You'll make Joe Sabatini really happy back there because he's so lonely. He just kind of like wants all the people to come up and ask him all sorts of cool questions. So with that said, Lynn, I'll turn it over to you. Thank you.
You know, one of the goals was to sort of showcase design and architecture practitioners because, as Ted said, you know, in terms of the profession, they're kind of invisible. And we decided to start this series with two women. And so we're really lucky today to have Cynthia Figueroa-McInteer, who's Laguna Pueblo, and Anjelica Gallegos, who's Jicarilla Apache, and Ana Pueblo join us this morning as panelists, and they're going to talk about Indigenous women, particularly in the career field of architecture and design, and share their backgrounds, their inspirations, the values that guide their work. And it's an interesting pairing because we have somebody who's recently retired and someone who's starting out their career as a kind of way to talk about this in different kinds of ways. So let me give you a little information about them. Cynthia is one of the first 2 licensed Indigenous women architects in the country. And she's the first in New Mexico. She gets embarrassed when I say that, but I think it's really important. She's both Laguna Pueblo and Pascua Yaqui, and she's lived in this area her entire life. She earned her MArch at UNM, and she was principal of her own firm, Figueroa-McInteer Architecture LLC, which provided her with opportunity to focus on smaller community projects from start to finish and through construction. But in her career, she also held many positions at Sandia National Laboratories, and she recently retired there as manager of the facility's strategic planning department. Anjelica has degrees from both the University of Colorado in Denver and an MArch from Yale University, where she received the Alpha Rho Chi Medal. And for those of you who don't know that, that's a national honor awarded to students for their leadership, service, and potential in the field. And she's an architectural designer in the government studio at Page Sutherland Page here. And she's also co-founder of ISAPD, which is the Indigenous Society of Architecture, Planning, and Design. And her work has been featured in Architectural Digest, Metropolis Magazine, maybe talk, and many others. And she pushes the boundaries of design thought in sensitive environments from everywhere from the Southwest and Arctic to the New England coast. She's designing systematic programming that elevates Indigenous history, practices, and knowledge while advancing connection building and the reciprocity of, I'll be able to talk here in a second, reciprocity of the broader architecture field. And her research and built work focuses on indigeneity in architecture, including memory policy and architecture in like the federal Indian boarding school system, as well as sustainable design practice applications. This is a lot of stuff for a really young person who wears a lot of hats. So please join me in welcoming both of them to today's panel.
Kawatsi, Dawashrawasha. It's greetings to everyone. I want to begin by saying Nitra, and that means thank you, to Dr. Ted Hohola and Dr. Lynn Paxson. I'm so honored to be included in, to participate in the steering, or the steering committee, and then also to be invited today to speak. When I talk about my path as a designer and builder, I always have to begin with my grandpa. This is John J. Alonzo. He was born in 1899. He's from Laguna Pueblo. Grandpa was educated in the Indian boarding school system. He went to the Albuquerque Indian School when he was 8 years old, and then when he was 14, went to the Carlisle Indian Industrial School. This picture on the top includes my grandfather. He's in the very first row, right in the middle below the guy in the back with the long coat. Well, that's President Woodrow Wilson. And then Carlisle Indian School closed in 1918, and Grandpa went on to school at the Haskell Institute. Grandpa also, he's in this photograph. He's on the top row here on the far right. So when Grandpa was at school at Carlisle, I have a copy of his school record and some of his report cards, but I had the grades. He excelled in carpentry, 89%. And that was identified as his first vocational choice. So Grandpa became a builder. The most probably notable or famous work he ever worked on was the original buildings at Los Alamos National Laboratory that were done, probably starting in 43 when it was established through the 40s. And of course, that was built to support the Manhattan Project. My Aunt Luana would tell stories about how Grandpa would be gone from his ranch, from the family for long periods of time. And then he'd come home and he'd say, but I can't tell you what I was working on, but it was that project. I don't know, I don't have pictures or know a lot of the different buildings he worked on, but I do know that he, at one point, did some renovation at the Highland Theater in the lobby area. And that building's been changed many times over time, but something interesting is my brother is a jazz musician and he works for the National Dance Institute who's based in this building now. And then I mentioned Grandpa's ranch. We call this the little house in our family, but Grandpa built this single bedroom dwelling on his ranch in Laguna, which is near the Tahajali border. And here is where him and my Pasquayaki, very strong, amazing grandmother, Carmen Thompson, raised their kids until they moved to a small farm in the South Valley. So when I think about what made me become an architect, I got a little bit of a story here. When I was in high school, I was going to study fine arts, and I got a presidential scholarship to UNM, and I had already registered for classes. But then my mom knew I loved Pablo Picasso, and she saw this Time magazine and bought it for me. And it talked about how a retrospective of his work would be there, the largest show of that type. I really wanted to see this show. My Aunt Luana had just given me $500 for graduation, and I called her and I said, I want to use some of this money and buy a plane ticket, come and see you because I want you to take me to that show. And she did. And when I was out there with her, she took me to a lot of great places. We went to Philadelphia, Cape Cod, of course, New York. And we were in Boston during the 350 Jubilee celebration. And while I was there, I saw this church, and I loved it. I just thought it was so interesting. The masonry was beautiful. I liked the detailing. I'd never seen anything like that, and really had hardly been anywhere outside of New Mexico. And I loved how it was just placed among all these skyscrapers. And it was that day that I said, wow, architecture is art, and maybe I should be an architect. And so I came home, went to registration at UNM, changed, everything I was going to do, and didn't look back. So this is a picture of me in graduate school. And that project there was, it was something for the Santa Fe Opera. There was something that happened to me. It's not a nice story, but it did affect the work I've done for Native Americans. I had a professional practice class, and our first assignment was to do a resume. And my professor called me up and he said, you need to do this over. No one's going to give you a job. And I said, but if I do it over, I'll have to lie, because that is my experience. And he pointed to the resume and he said, this is the only thing that's important. And it's the line where I wrote, born of Native American descent. And so that was such a hard, hurtful thing, and I carried it with me for a long time, but it did impact my choices. So, I talked about my role model as Grandpa, but I also had a lot of role models, and really, they were all Native American women. So I want to spend a little time talking about that. Advance in my notes here. Give me a sec. Okay. So when I was in elementary school, we lived in Laguna Pueblo for a while. And Carrie Olguin, who was the matriarch of the Olguin family there, was very, very good to us. She had me and my siblings call her Chi'i, which is Tiwa for grandmother. Mrs. Olguin, or Chi'i, she would have my older sister and I participate in spiritual and ceremonial things, traditional things. And like the first time I went to a kiva, the first time I got to help make Pueblo bread, one time she had us come and help whitewash her house, and they were doing some plaster repair work. And I remember that she told me that it was the woman's responsibility to maintain the home. I don't mean cooking and cleaning. I mean you have to keep a head over, a roof over your families, and you do it with your hands. And I never forgot about that. And then Verna Teller, or Chi'i's daughter, who was the Chief Justice and former governor of Isleta, I remember when she built her own home out of terrones. And for those of you who don't know, terrones is a masonry unit that's cut from the riverbed, and it dries, and the plant material roots is the binding thing. It's harder to build with terrones. They're heavy. And I was so impressed that Verna made her home. So, fast forward, I'm there at UNM, and I keep hearing about the amazing Rena Swensel. She was from Santa Clara. She went through the School of Architecture before I did, and she just was a really brilliant student. She was a potter, an author, a historian, lecturer, and of course, she was an architect and a planner. Sometimes when I had downtime at school, I would go to the research libraries and I would look for things about Native American architecture. And when I would come across historic photos that had something about building or materials that you build with, almost always it included a picture with women. And it kept happening, tribe after tribe. Like, I love this photograph that I came across a long time ago, but it shows these women building this grass house in Wichita. And I'm pretty certain that's not just a dwelling, because it's quite big. But look at them up there, they're just crushing it. I mean, it's amazing. And then, so that picture was taken in 1903. And then this one in the middle, this Digueno House, Campo, that picture was taken by Edward Curtis in 26. Now, we all know that he would kind of stage his pictures, but I just love seeing that woman sitting there with the grass, and I'm imagining that was the home that she built for her and her family. And then this 1905 photograph, also by Curtis, showing this woman doing mud plaster on this stone masonry dwelling in Hopi. So then I was super excited to find Laguna references. This is really cool. This picture here on the right shows a couple of women doing plastering in Powati, and that's the village my grandpa's from. So that was taken in 1925. And then the one here on the left, beautiful photograph by Laguna's very own Lee Marmon, taken in 1960. And it looks like those women are getting plaster or maybe mortar ready. And I just love their happy faces. And even some contemporary examples. A couple of years ago, I heard Roxanne Swensel's son give a talk about his mother building their home in Santa Clara. And this article is worth looking up, My Mother the Builder. It's in New Mexico Magazine, but it shows Roxanne there and the home there that they had in Santa Clara. And then this example here on the right, the woman here with the sweatshirt on, that's my Aunt Johnny. And Aunt Johnny had inherited a vintage wood stove that used to be in the Acoma Hotel. The Acoma Hotel was in Laguna. It was built by my great uncle, Walter Saraceno, and he was governor 3 times in Laguna. And even though they call it the Acoma Hotel, it was in Laguna and it was by the tracks. But it caught fire in the 70s, unfortunately. But Johnny had this stove. She wanted to get it restored and then to have a little building for it. So she just started building her own bakehouse, She did stone masonry, and so she built about 2/3 of that little building behind her bread oven herself, with stone, and then she did the wall that's around the courtyard, and she brought in somebody else to help finish the framing and put the roof on it. But during our feast days, she cooks and serves people there. And this batch of bread here, that's Johnny's been teaching me how to make Pueblo bread over the last couple of years, so that was one of our attempts. Anyway, she's one of my role models too. So my architectural career, I kind of break it down into 3 chunks. Lynn mentioned Sandia Labs, and you think, God, what does that have to do with architecture? Well, I was a summer hire at Sandia for 2 years when I was an undergrad. And then when I finished school, I was trying to find an intern job and wasn't having much luck. And Sandia called me and they said, Cynthia, you wanna work full time here as an illustrator? And I said, well, I just started graduate school and I don't wanna stop. The next day, my boss, he called me back and he said, that's a mission-related field and Sandia will pay for you to go to graduate school. And I was like, whoa. So I did that, and they did pay for graduate school. And then when I finished my master's degree, I did go over to the facilities organization. I worked as a project manager and did strategic planning. But I couldn't become an architect if I stayed there because I couldn't meet the requirements for licensing. So I took a 50% cut in pay, no kidding, jumped off like a cliff and went to be an intern. And then I went to BPLW Architects and Engineers, and I worked there for 5 years. And I learned tons at BPLW. But my second kind of not so nice story happened when I was there. And we teamed with a large firm in town to go after the replacement high school in Laguna Acoma High School. And my part was going to be to do the planning work. And I was working part-time at home that summer, and I let everybody know when I was going to be back full-time, and it wasn't going to be a problem. It's fine. But when I came back, they had done all the work that I was supposed to do, but didn't inform me. So that being exploited is a terrible thing. But I decided right then that I would never, ever do Native American work until I was in charge. So in 2003, I opened my own firm, Figueroa-McInteer Architecture. Lynn mentioned it was a small firm. It was just me for a while. At my height, I had one full-time architect and 2 part-time, admin, bookkeeping people. But during that time, I worked on, let's see, I have some numbers here. Let's see, this diagram showing you 66 different projects that I did. 45% of them were construction, they're shown with the red dots, and 55% were studies. So during that time, I started doing Native American work, and about 40% of my work was done for Native clientele. This slide shows you the different tribes and Native communities where my work is. Okay. So in 2005, I got my first kind of good size project, and it was for the Laguna Housing Development and Management Enterprise. And it was to do a feasibility study to look at sustainable housing infill for HUD developments that were in 5 of their 6 villages. And so I worked on that with Environmental Dynamics, ASCG, and Bayless and Company. We explored the climatic considerations in each village, the housing developments, where we could have growth, road patterns. We looked at sun and shade, and where you can use overhangs to reduce heat in the house and what you can build them with. We also looked at all the different systems to support housing, like power, gas, communications, all the infrastructure you need. And we did several concepts for single-family homes, multifamily homes, and it was a good study. But when I was interviewed for this work, what I told the Housing Authority that sustainability shouldn't just be about design and construction, it should be about culture, and that we should look at areas to include that when they're looking at housing. So there are some things that I knew and I learned from my mother and my aunts and my relatives, but I also interviewed a couple women, Clara Jean Green and Julia Herrera, and when you get the input from everybody, we came up with a couple lists, some outdoor features that you want to make sure the entrance to the house faces east or southeast, that there should always be access to a flat roof so that a family can have a throw. And a throw is when the family or the clan gathers food together. It could be fruits and vegetables. Sometimes it's pottery or other things that could be shared with people, and they literally throw it out. And if you've been to a Pueblo fiesta, you may have seen a throw going on. Outdoor space, so you could build an oven and also have gathering places for the community at every single one of these home sites. For indoor features, feeding people is a huge deal in the Pueblos. It's very important for us to share and to invite people into our homes, so that there needs to be separate areas for cooking, eating, and waiting, right? There should be room for 2 cooks in the kitchen, and even if you have a small 2-bedroom home, you should be able to feed maybe 8 people at a time. The people have to be able to wait in a separate area. There should be line-of-sight privacy to the restroom. Doorways need to be wide enough, not only for wheelchairs, but considering a dancer wearing a large headdress or bringing a casket into the home. There should be options for wood burning, so a fireplace or a wood stove. Sometimes they're used for cooking. It's common to see out in Laguna, they roast acorns and piñons often. There should be space on site for additional bedrooms. The tradition of Pueblo dwellings was that when your family got bigger, you added another room. So the siting for all these homes included that. And that there should also be important places to display, like your native dress or even a place for corn pollen for prayer. So of the work I've done for Native clientele, it's pretty much in 3, most of it's in 3 groups: housing, historic preservation, and also education. When I had my firm, I shared my office with Van Sitter's Historic Preservation for 7 years. And during that time, I worked on 18 different historic preservation plans with Karen Van Sitter's. And these are my 3 Pueblo examples. Actually, I have another one in a Saletta, but that's okay. This first one was done for the Phoenix Area Indian Health Service. And this little building at the bottom there, that's the Hope Villa Health Station. It was built in 1915, and it's located in Hopi on Third Mesa. So when I went out, I would look at, what's the condition of the building and what are the historic character-defining features. And this little building was built by local craftsmen, and it had held, at that point, it was already 100 years old, and it just was so beautifully performing. They continued to operate the medical services in there through the 70s, and then in the 90s it became a corn mill, or a mill for grinding corn and other grains. I love the masonry in this building, and that roof, it looks, you're not sure what it is, it's brown, but it's a copper roof, and that's the color copper turns in our environment. A copper roof is a 100-year roof system, and this roof was like in excellent condition. The next building I looked at Hopi was, it's just commonly called the Rock House, and it was built in 1933. What was really interesting about this is it was just sandwiched between these 2 existing big rocks out to the north and south. The 2-bedroom dwelling that was built as part of the Keams Canyon Indian Hospital. So it's probably where maybe one of the doctors or some medical provider lived. Eventually it was used for storage, and when I looked at it, it was in very poor condition, and I'm not so sure it'll ever be rehabilitated. But it's there in Hopi and Keams Canyon. And then this other one I'm sharing with you, a historic preservation plan that we did for the Isleta School. The photograph in the middle I took of their big assembly room. It's a great space. And one thing that I thought was great is that, they asked Karen to come in and to evaluate the opportunity for rehabilitation and to provide design guidance for the general area. And we felt strongly that this building should be preserved, and I was very happy to hear that it became a cultural center for the Pueblo. And this picture was from the internet up there, but you could see that it's now in use. And I haven't gone yet to see it, but I'm pretty excited about that one. And then I got to do a couple education projects, and these were both in Isleta. This is the library and educational complex. In the site plan, the building is showing you as like the number 1 on the site plan. And the inspiration for this facility came from the cultural committee that we worked with, which included Dr. Henry Walt, Juan Jaramillo, Valentino Jaramillo, Richard Abeda, Celestino Lucero, and Isidore Martin. But what the cultural committee wanted to do was to emphasize the regional history of agriculture and other things that were related to agriculture, predominantly the cardinal directions. Decker Parrott Sabatini had designed the elementary school, which is directly west of this facility. They became my architectural and landscape consultant. We also worked with Bohannon Houston for the civil engineering. Rock Gap did the mechanical, electrical, plumbing. Art Logan Conham was our estimator, and the facility was built by the Janes Corporation. But working with the cultural committee was wonderful. What they said is they don't want any cultural reference to be obvious. They wanted everything to be very subtle so that when you walk someone through the facility, an elder could say, oh, well, this pattern on the floor here, that's about our cardinal directions. And so we use that to create the axis through the building, north, south, and east and west. In the Pueblo tradition, the entrance faces east. The cardinal directions is where we aligned the corridors that led to the major components of the building. And even the landscaping included references to the cardinal directions. The flower and foliage colors were picked to show white in the east, black for north, yellow for west, and blue-green for south. And we also had an enclosed courtyard for storytelling near the children's area and a path to the school. The other education project, so if you look at the exhibit, you'll see that this Head Start facility was originally designed by Janet Carpio. She's Laguna and Isleta, and she did that as her graduate project. And then they really wanted to build it. Oh my gosh. So she was really fortunate to have Cherry C. Architects become the architect of record, and Jim and Cherry and Edie are here. Okay. But, they brought on Janet as an employee and got to make this facility real. My part was in 2010. I was included on a design build team with Hart Engineering, Design and Construction, SMPC Architects, and myself. So design build is where the general contractor's in charge of all the architects and engineers and contractors, and they put the whole thing together as opposed to just designing it and putting out to bid and then building it. So it's a little bit different delivery method, but often can be used to cut schedule. And that's the tricky part about this is we got the contract, and then the next day, Peggy Favor with SMPC and I, we went and interviewed the director of the Head Start and her staff, and poor Carla Estrada Brannick, that was her first day of work. She gets to deal with us. And told that you have to make all the decisions today and you don't get to change your mind. So that was, so we did that. I designed the floor plan, and what we did was we renovated a wing and created a couple places for toddlers. We converted a garage into a multi-purpose room for parent classes. The facility needed more offices and another restroom, so the addition included that. We put in a mother's lounge, or for nursing mothers, and then this large room so that they can now have infants at the facility. construction, and so this was crazy. So I drew this plan out, sent it out, everybody got to make their comments, finalized it, I think by day 3. And we started putting everything together. And the next time I was on site, I walked through the place with, the contractor with the big red grease pencil, and I put an X on everything that they had to start tearing out. I mean, it was crazy. But one of the things we had to do on this project is we had to raise the head height of some of the doors that exited into the courtyard. And it was a code-related issue. And because of the head height, we weren't going to be able to keep these arched shades that are over the paired windows and doors. And that really bothered me because those were special, elegant things that I wanted to not just get rid of, but we couldn't put them back where the new doors were because the structure and everything didn't work out. So we were able to keep them and reuse them and get them in the right alignment. We ended up installing them on the side of the addition that was done for the infants. And I felt that was something that was important to honor the design that Cherry C Architects and Janet put together for the facility. So anyway, that's what I have to share with you. And in addition to an architect, I'm also a quilter. And I'll let you look at some of my quilts. And I will.
Hello everyone, thank you for coming today, and I want to echo Cynthia's thoughts and thank Ted Hahola and Lynn Paxson for inviting me to be part of the exhibition and part of this series. I've already met some really great friends and mentors like Cynthia, and I'm thankful to be able to do that through this program. In 2004, I went to the grand opening of the National Museum of the American Indian in Washington, D.C. with my family as a preteen.
Can you talk up a little bit?
Oh, sorry. Okay.
She's very soft-spoken, that's what we're helping her work on.
It was substantial to experience different tribal communities coming together at an international level to celebrate a place that welcomed and reflected so many different cultures. I experienced a space that conveyed belief systems, lifeways, and practices. From the rippled husks of the corn in the garden outside to the rough sandy limestone of the facade, being with my aunt, mom, dad, and brother in the museum was special for me. Looking back, NMAI showed me a building can be expressive and artistic. This is a contemporary art museum I designed, and it was one of the first times I decided to incorporate my personal artwork into my architectural design. With this project and drawing, I tried to bring specificity to site by showing the building as part of a larger living system of other buildings, people, and landscape. I grew up across a few different Western states and was able to experience different cities and landscapes, from Colorado, Montana, New Mexico, and California. As a first-generation college student alongside my brother, I went to the University of Colorado, Denver, where I was part of the Bachelor of Science in Architecture program that Phil Gallegos started at the school. It was the very first accredited undergraduate program offered in Colorado, and I was part of a very small graduating class of mostly males and graduated cum laude. Thank you. After graduating, I wanted to take some time to be around family. So I did not work in architecture and instead worked in Dulce for the Jicarilla Apache Nation's Legislative Council as an editor and photographer. I also worked for a National Historic Landmark, the Cumbres and Toltec Scenic Railroad. It's the longest, highest, and most historically preserved steam railroad in North America. In 2018, I decided to return to school for my master's degree in architecture. I was accepted into Yale School of Architecture as part of Dean Deborah Burke's first selected class after she redeveloped the curriculum. After graduation and working for the Haas Family Arts Library on campus, I returned to New Mexico. After a start into the full-time architecture firm arena, I ended up at Page Sutherland Page here in Albuquerque in Uptown, where I work with design teams on different projects across the country. So why architecture? My family is creative, so I was around art growing up with mostly drawing and painting. I think art is a way of communicating beyond words, is subjective, and can also be functional. Creativity is important to me, and I wanted a medium of expression, but also something that was impactful to everyday lives. Architecture can become something very beautiful and special. It became an available program for me at the University of Colorado, Denver, and I was fortunate enough to have guidance from advisors like Phil Gallegos and Glenn Morris to navigate the educational system. So what does that have to do with these images? If you were to ask me on the architectural registration exam what the primary purpose of architecture is, it's to keep people safe and provide shelter. I choose to believe architecture is more than that. It's a vehicle for ideas and aspirations, for ideals. It's one step in a long process to generate change and to surpass needs. Architecture is the work no one sees before a deliverable or a final product is shown. It's a way to create a community that surpasses the anthropocenic view that is dominant today. It's a reflection of the identity of a site or a place. I've been fortunate enough to experience living in different scales of cities and types of landscapes, and I can see how they influence day-to-day living. In rural areas, it's easier to realize how dependent we are on natural and man-made infrastructure. Building and architecture is a service of ethical and moral responsibility beyond yourself to the client, community, and natural environment. Though it's a service provided for others, it's ultimately an extension of the maker. This is a collage of the different work that I did as a student. I think architecture is really about carving space in multiple dimensions, and there's different ways to convey this with the purpose using different mediums. The top center image is a collaborative project we did with the Yale School of Medicine, but it's a screenshot in virtual reality. It's an MRI scan of a brain with Proteus syndrome, which is a condition determined by abnormalities seen in the brain. It's often misdiagnosed, and so we were making these 3D models to help solve this issue. In the model, CT scans are aligned to their location within the brain, so doctors can see the 2D scan and experience it in 3D to better identify this particular condition. The middle right image is an exploded axonometric model of a Coast Salish longhouse. I worked with a community in Washington that was interested in preserving their construction practices and providing an experiential space for future generations to learn about these longhouses. So that's an example of how different tools and virtual reality can be used for preservation and teaching. And the bottom image is a model probably 2.5 by 2 feet large. It was for this program called the People's Land Center, and I was able to incorporate the reed that I used to make baskets with to show the roof structure of the building. This is some of the historical research I've done for different projects to different ends. The Alcatraz Island occupation on the top left was significant as an act of Indigenous resistance, compelling justice and recognition of tribal self-determination and sovereignty. It helped solidify an official U.S. policy, law of tribal self-determination, and prompted increased focus and resources to Indigenous communities through the Indian Self-Determination and Education Assistance Act. The federal Indian boarding school system was part of a twin policy of Indian territorial dispossession and Indian assimilation. Architecture was central in these efforts to assimilate and to house these identity-altering methodologies. The building and infrastructure of the system included different types of buildings, including new, dismantled, reusable materials, and moving of used buildings or recycled materials for Indian boarding school purposes. Also, I'm interested in how natural resource management is part of altering, but also stewarding the broader environment. Through research, it shows the heritage of sites where natural resources came from and understanding how government policy has directly impacted tribal communities today. I think if you look at the historical framework and the backbone of this country, it's easy to see the Indigenous influence on infrastructure, from place names to transportation routes and resource management. Indigenous architecture predates American architecture, so I think it's helpful to get to know the sites we're building on in this way. This is some of the collaborative work that I've been able to work on with several other young Native designers, including, there's probably some here, but Miriam Diddy, she'll be talking on the 10th. Selena Brown Otter, there's a lot of great designers that I'm very privileged to do this work with. And so the top one on the left, that was from an exhibition called Making Space for Resistance, Past, Present, and Future. That was at Yale School of North Gallery, the Yale School of Architecture's North Gallery. And that one was with Summer Sutton and Cheryl Brown. That relates back to the Alcatraz Island occupation. We did this exhibition on the 50th anniversary of that, and it each other in our own endeavors and work that encompassed community principles, but also to critique and strengthen each other. All of the work we did as a group, the exhibition, the curriculum suggestions, was all extracurricular on top of our regular student loads. This work was done prior to 2020 and with much less EDI support, and also partly during COVID. Growing up socially and politically aware and having my own experience with education and mainstream systems, including the erasure of American Indian student services and the push for multiculturalism in schools, I learned it's stronger and in a way safer to do this work in a group, though I still did and do this work on my own. We were met with support and resistance alike, even with the subtle and not so subtle means and methods we had. Since then, we've expanded into an organization as the Indigenous Society of Architecture, Planning and Design, with the same mission, but expanding it to the academic and professional realm. We also work toward fundamentally supporting and increasing the representation of other Indigenous communities. It's a membership organization, so we have students and professionals, and AICAE predates us for a very long time, but we're really happy to be collaborating with them more and more. That's the American Indian Council of Architects and Engineers. Our main goal is to stimulate and contribute towards national and local conversation through publication, lectures, and events, and also to create speaking opportunities for Native practitioners, and students. Also, we want to promote architecture, planning, and design as a viable profession for Native youth and be an active resource for encouragement and inspiration. So we do that through a lot of different ways. Most of it is collaborative with different community partners. We have a lecture series with Arctober, that's in October every year. We hold different model making competitions, which is mostly for students to build up their own portfolio and meet other young folks in the field. We also do built work, like the Equinox House. That was at Indigenous Architecture Days. That was actually in 23. And what that is it's a community event celebrating Indigenous spatial practices with skill building and knowledge sharing activities. And that was here in 23 in September. That was at the Valle de Oro National Wildlife Refuge Visitor Center. And we had different workshops and lectures there for 2 days. And then we moved the installation, shipped it to New York, and had an event there as well. We also, again, invite speakers for lectures and different panels. Last year, we received a Community Impact Award, which is our first award ever, and it's from the Association of Tribal Archives, Libraries, and Museums. So this is if you'd like to know more information about ISAPD in terms of the resources we have, different types of membership, and because we started during COVID, a lot of our events have been virtual, which is good because then you can just come online at any point. But we've also been wanting to do more in-person events. So I encourage you to stay in touch if you're interested. And again, thanks everyone.
So maybe start out with a couple of things that it's really interesting to look at these two together. I thought it was interesting. Well, maybe interesting things, but that both of these guys have done preservation as part of what they're doing. That both people talked about architecture as living systems, and of course, they've both talked about the importance of cultural information and qualities in architecture in very different kinds of ways. So I wonder if either of you want to perhaps say anything to other for chapters in thought about it, like choice size, because panelists now get to put each part to it.
Okay. Well, I just want to say that through this process, I've gotten to know Anjelica a little bit and see the amazing visual and dynamic work she does. And I tell you, Native American architecture is at a good place in her hand. Some was in the right place. It's been, I should get into know Cynthia so far, and I'm excited to, should the conversation going. Just having built work, and I think architecture, a long-term commitment, and all of the work that you've done is really inspiring for me and impactful to see. So it's a good example to learn from. I'm in a totally different realm professionally, but still lessons to learn, and excited to keep talking more.
Also, given their different generational sort of places in the profession, the fact that both of them talked about the difference in sustainability in their recently used that combat the oppression does, and the ways that you guys step work with sustainability in your own practices and work is really important. I think something that might be a topic that some people would be interested in talking about today. But before I go on, let's see. And there are folks that have some questions for either speaker or both. we let the dance go.
What I appreciate was talking about the structure being symbiotic with the environment. And most adults in society don't think about that. But as we're wanting to care about our younger people in society, especially Indigenous younger people, I wanted to ask you, how do we make these subjects interesting to them so that they're drawn to that and not other careers that may not be as rewarding or as related to their own cultures?
I think one of the things is that just maybe sharing what we know and what we've been through with young people. The few times I've got to talk to schools, kids are interested in the built environment. They're interested in thinking about where they're from and how things come together. But I think most importantly is to make sure that they understand that the choices their community holds are really important, and that their culture, should be at the very top of the list of how maybe they could keep that in mind, But I know that Alejandra's done a lot of work with schools and talking to kids.
So, as she.
I also think part of it is the way, we're raised, and I think thinking beyond yourself is more common to the folks, and so I think just making sure that you keep that going and get used to facing different types of challenges with that. I think are pictures of field where it's historically very male dominated, and the science part of the architecture is much more, it's been very more, I think, with the spectrum you're going through school. The more creative side is less, and it depends on which school, but it's often less important. And I think there's a lot of, like Cynthia was saying, interest from students, but and I think creativity is also a commonality, and so honing in and trying to strengthen that set of skills is important on top of more of the science and math-based skills. So it's a very viable profession, and like Cynthia said, I think part of the problem perhaps is just there's so very few practitioners, and that's why there's so many different efforts, programs to try to solve this. And so
Thanks, people. And also add that, you were talking about this siloing in terms of the profession, but also generally, and most Indigenous concepts are less in little packages, be more integrated. And so Indigenous students are really good at architecture because they think that way. And it's about making a whole place, little places, a little bit at a time. So I think that point that you guys were making about the sort of more integrated or balanced communication. There's something else in the air that yes.
it was this gentleman here.
Thank you. At one point you were talking about building in the context of celestial alignment, or I think it was celestial, not solar. How do the Pueblos look at that in comparison to some other cultures like Machu Picchu and so forth? Is there something kind of unique about the way you think about it?
Well, I think every one of us here could say more about that, but Chaco Canyon, of course, is the primary example. And so it's a calendar that aligns to different equinoxes and solstices. And so that kind of influences the way they organize the entirety of all of the different buildings. And then also related is like where you can put the entrances or exits for buildings. But it all kind of is related to our alignment and kind of living patterns with the rising sun and the setting sun. So with that small tiny installation we did, we kind of wanted to bring more attention to this way of thinking of buildings and it being more of a like symbolic alignment to the exterior. So we had different calendars that were part of the installation and also the alignment on the fall equinox. It was perfectly 90 degrees to the installation. So the alignment of different angles, I think, is important to learn from.
You know, I was at Chaco camping in October. And, you know, Chaco Canyon was built by Pueblo people, including my ancestors. And I kept thinking about that and I just was, it was just an incredible, humbling thought. But one of the things I was thinking about is they had this connection to nature that was so powerful. And I think through time, when Native people have been put on reservations and, you know, their buildings have been handed to them, this is the kind of house you're gonna live in, this is what your school looks like now, and et cetera, et cetera. These things that are innate and part of the culture, I don't wanna say lost, because in Laguna, they don't say they lost or stopped something, they set it aside. So I think Native people have been forced to set a lot of things aside, but it is still there. And I think that young people who understand those connections in the field now, like Alejandra, they're gonna start bringing that stuff back because it is still part of our race.
I do have a question back here. Thank both of you for your lovely presentations. I was very interested in the early pictures of women building the homes, and I once had the privilege of helping to adobe a home. In the Pueblo culture, either particularly or in general, was the home the domain of women, and did the home belong to the woman's clan? And were there parallel structures that were built by men for use of men?
So in most Pueblos are matriarchal societies. So yeah, the home belonged to the women, and like kind of the succession. So I'm thinking about the home my grandpa was born in Powati. That building passed down to actually the youngest sister. In a real traditional way, the youngest daughter is expected to care for the elders, probably because she's going to live the longest. But anyway, so that family home in Powati kind of went to, instead of my grandma, instead of Grandma Lena, no, I'm getting the names mixed up there. But it went to the younger sister, and so it's not in my direct line now, but it's still cousins are there. And I think the men, you know, did more of the things that were about raising animals and agriculture and hunting. But I do think men and women, they just work together, really. I don't think there was this split like you do this and you do this. So very cooperative approach.
Thank you both so much for those beautiful presentations. So I know you spoke about the need for your services and architects, builder services based on the mission or based on, you know, whatever someone in society perceives as the need. But I'm curious whether you kind of have your own personal dream project based on a need that you see, or if you were, I don't know if architects dream this way. I mean, artists certainly sometimes do, but is there a dream building or a dream structure that you have that you would be interested in building, even if nobody asked you to?
I got asked that question when I was, you know, And, asked that once, and I've always wanted to do a conservatory. Well, instead of doing wildlife, it's just buildings for plants, and I've seen some beautiful conservatories, but not sure it's in my heart anymore, but I think that happened. And I also wanted to have a really great house somewhere like near the river, the North Valley. But quite frankly, I just can't afford it. It's another thing about architects. We usually don't make as much money because of the foundation stuff like this.
Yeah, it's hard to narrow that one down. But I would say, like, museums, making a museum, it's agree just to they tend to be more like creative than other types of companies. And also, it's not a building, but programmatically. So we're doing that as ACPD is, I think, a dream to try to connect people more and encourage Native youth and having a strong community of practitioners. So I think making that convening of all of the architects, planners, and designers to kind of encourage each other and challenge each other is a game that I think would influence the field entirely. I think with projects now, it's more about like the client, of course, so you kind of have to beat it out. So I talk with the client and see what they want to do and to make if maybe they're more open to different ideas.
I was just so thrilled to be here today, and I just love that we have women brains out there just doing wonderful things. So thank you for that. Shame on myself. My question is, I do a lot of work with government, tribal governments, and you both talked about things that I'm always interested in terms of government responsibility, tribal government responsibility, and what they're building in terms of our community. Offices, right now, I work in the justice field, so I'm always talking to people about when you're going to build a jail, don't follow that model that's out there in American mainstream society, because it's not a living, it doesn't make people better coming out of it. It makes them worse, sicker, and all of that. Healthcare systems, and we've come, as Native people, we've come new to some of the other kinds of things, like having nursing homes in our communities, because we didn't do those kinds of things. Our families took care of that. And both of you really explain how you incorporate culture into architecture, that it's not, you didn't objectify just your idea, because it's very hard for people when you say it needs to be cultural. We need to use our cultural resources. We need to use our cultural ways of thinking and planning. And Cynthia, your description of what you did with the ladies about how to build a Pueblo home, and that it needed to be a way of life, not display. To me, is a really different way of thinking about how do you build something from that. It's very skillful, heartfelt, and then mindful. And that you build all of that into it. And so I'm just wondering, in the ways that we can talk to our leadership, what, your Alcatraz ideas and things that's the world I live in all the time. And to bring that kind of language, cultural language and those kinds of things, what would you recommend for us, those of us that are in these fields, talking to our leadership all the time to convince them, build us, all those things that you said, in our language, you can set it aside. Put it aside, bring it back. And that's the kind, I'm in the bring it back mode right now. Because I'm nervous about it being lost. If we don't bring it back, if it stays set aside, what do we need to say to our leadership?
So,
Good to tell. You know, when I first talked to the Laguna Housing Authority about housing, it said that we just need to really do it the Indian way, right? And I think people need to understand that. That it's possible, and it doesn't have to be too expensive, and it doesn't have to be unattainable. It's a design challenge. We're bringing in these designers to figure out and solve the problem, and the need for those things is just, as important as having an entrance and a roof over the building.
From the get-go, it's like this will be incorporated.
Mm-hmm.
And I think when you get a lot of people together and they start talking about the buildings they live in and the communities, and that their voice is important, to just, take the time to plan for the kind of community engagement so you can start bringing their ideas forward. Because they may not just be free with that information by themselves, but often when we're working with our neighbors and people we know, we'll start encouraging each other to voice these things.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one thing I had found about working on Native American projects. Like I said, the client sometimes is paying for your design fees. Oftentimes would be a state, maybe, or a federal agency, but the end users need to be listened to.
Mm-hmm.
And so the designer has a professional responsibility to manage that process so that they are, can deal with the funding sources, but also figure it out and solve the problem.
I think I would echo Cynthia's thoughts and go to the community and create conversation there. Also, like a lot of tribes have the TIPOs, Tribal Historic Preservation Officers, so like starting more of a theoretical, like open-minded discussion before you bring in budget, and maybe even before there's a possibility to build something, but to have some kind of master plan study where you have your top priorities like filled out in a way. I think it's good to put the idea first before the work comes out. And also there's like several different precedents from different Native practitioners that might be good to show leadership. I think also one thing is welcoming new graduates who want to go back and serve their tribes, and kind of listening to their maybe new ideas and new methods that they have would be important to keep modernizing and at least listen to a different perspective.
ma'am, could I piggyback on that? I appreciate this person's comment. So I worked on a reservation for 5 years as an electrician in a cold climate. So working there, I didn't quite understand why the tribal government allowed the federal government to bring in mobile homes from the south, from the cyclones and hurricanes. Why would you bring those up to a northern climate and act like they're blessing the tribal people? It just didn't make sense. I remember one person's electric bill by south was over $1,000. Who's going to be able to pay that? And then we bring those kinds of things to the attention of tribal leadership, tribal governments, and it's like there's no thought given to those things ahead of time. So I feel tribal government needs to be way more progressive, not stuck in the past in certain areas, and be just more creative in how you're going to take care of your people.
I was also going to say that one of the things is about reminding folks that you're sovereign nations, so you can fight against particular building codes that do not meet your needs. And you know, this is a hard thing for people to do, particularly because you want the money. And some groups are really working on how to deal with that. LEED is a good example. I mean, LEED is not particular to a place or to a culture. And it would, if you wanted to have standards like that, fine, but let's have standards that make sense where we are. The joke used to be, oh, we'll make 3 bus stops there. Of course, we have no buses, but we'll put them on the plan so it's like, you know, that kind of silliness. We're in the exhibit at Sky City Cultural Center in Yakima. One of the things that they did is that exit signs, like over that door, they're required never to go off. That's part of the code, right? Well, Yakima is a sacred valley, and they have the lights, all the lights off sometimes. And this became this huge issue because they were like, well, no one will know that they're on. And the Yakima guys were like, we'll know, and that's who matter. And they had to actually find a place that would construct exit signs that could be shut off because they didn't make them. And they did it because it was important to them and they were pushy about it. So sometimes you have to get your tribal government to be a little bit more pushy. So let's see, there were some other things, yeah.
And that would have to be our final question.
Final question?
Yeah.
Uh-oh.
Yeah,
That's a lot of weight.
One of the things that you emphasized with your slides and your commentary was the communal nature of building. I remember those 3 ladies building that house. Wondering, as you look at more individualistic societies like our own, like mine, if you see a building, you can, with a really great building, pretty much identify who designed it. You know, a Frank Lloyd Wright building is a Frank Lloyd Wright building. Mies van der Rohe is Mies van der Rohe. I wonder if there's anything specific in your culture, either specific to Pueblo or to individual designers, where it's kind of a signature piece. It's about, see, that's the people.
You know, I'm thinking about the work by a very respected Native American architect named John Paul Jones, and he's done a lot of beautiful community facilities, museums with other tribes, and you know, he did the museum for the Southern Utes there, Nassau, Colorado. I mean, when I knew that was a John Paul Jones building before I, was able to verify. He has a wonderful way of integrating native kind of design and cultural elements. So I think it's emerging, and we have some good examples. That is emerging.
We're gonna see it soon.
Oh yeah, it's gonna be on.
We really want to thank everybody for coming. You know, we're gonna tour you through the exhibit if you want to stay. But thank you so much, and let's thank our panel. Cynthia and Anjelica did a great job. They were perfect. But be sure to join us on the 10th for the next.
That's right. That's right.
So
If you guys didn't have the